Hello and welcome. It is Thursday, October 29th. Happy Halloween. And this is this week's space and astronomy news. Last week I told you about the OSIRIS-REx sample collection, a super exciting multi-year mission to the asteroid Bennu to take a physical sample and return it to Earth. So the initial images I showed you last week indicated that the sample was likely successful, but the team since has had further images of the sample collection mechanism, which showed that the sample collection was indeed successful. In fact, it was a little bit too successful. They actually collected so much material that a spring-loaded flap that was intended to close to keep the sample inside the collector is jammed open because there's so much stuff inside. And so that means because it's open, a little bit of the sample was leaking into space. So in order to combat this and to get as much of the sample as possible back to Earth, the team decided to skip the mass measurement process, which would have taken longer and caused more sample to be lost, and instead went ahead and did the stow process early for the sample. Now this is a pretty long process, but as of last night, it was going very successfully and the collection chamber has been put inside of OSIRIS-Rex. Without the mass measurement, we don't know exactly how much sample that they collected, but by visual estimates, they know it was well in excess of their mission targets. And so congratulations to the OSIRIS-Rex team. Can't wait to find out what's in that sample in September 2023 when it returns to Earth, and exactly how much it weighs. So one of the SpaceX launches I mentioned that was supposed to happen last Thursday actually stood down due to a minor issue with one of the cameras, but it went ahead successfully on Saturday, launching another 60 Starlink satellites into orbit. And very excitingly, this launch marked the 100th Falcon launch since the Falcon 1 launch in 2008. Wow. And in those 100 launches, they've landed the boosters 63 times, and the boosters have been reflown 45 times. So this has been a really amazing decade for SpaceX. I'm looking forward to many more to come. You may have heard that NASA had a much hyped press conference on Monday to announce a discovery about the moon. So this was a discovery that was actually observed by the SOFIA satellite, which stands for Stratospheric Observatory for Infrared Astronomy, which is really cool. It's a 106-inch diameter telescope that's flown on a jet where it can go above most of the atmosphere and make these interesting infrared observations. And what SOFIA saw on the moon was water! Okay, so we already knew there was water on the moon, so you might think, why is this a big deal? Well, all of the water that we had seen before on the moon was in these permanently shadowed areas, which are really, really cold because they don't get the sunlight. But this water that SOFIA observed was actually in the sunlit portions of the moon, which previously scientists thought couldn't sustain water because it should just boil off. So this is a really exciting discovery, but it must be mentioned that the amount of water is very, very small, about 100 times drier than the Sahara Desert. So we're not talking about pools of water or anything here. But it's still an interesting discovery and opens the door for potentially having more water than we anticipated on the moon, which would be great for future missions there. In fact, the team did an Ask Me Anything AMA on Reddit, and I was able to ask them if this discovery would impact potential landing sites for Artemis, and they responded very nicely. I was very grateful to hear from them. And in their response, they said that access to sites of potential water were certainly of interest and that more work, of course, would be needed. Lastly, I want to mention another launch that happened this past week from a company called Rocket Lab. So Rocket Lab is another private spaceflight company. This one was founded in New Zealand, although it has a USA base in California. And it provides a really interesting mission of launching small satellites into orbit. So previously these small satellites would have to be kind of tacked on to larger missions, which don't happen as often and are very expensive. But Rocket Lab focuses on getting these small payloads into space. It can do a lot of them at once, and so can really be helpful fulfilling this niche because these small payloads can be really helpful. You don't need a big project all the time. So a lot of CubeSats, for example, can be launched this way. And their most recent launch was yesterday. The launch was called In Focus. They name all of their launches, which I think is cool. And it took place at their Rocket Lab Launch Complex 1 in New Zealand, and it launched 10 satellites into space, including 9 for a San Francisco-based imaging company called Planet. So those are some of the major space and astronomy news items that happened this week. Thanks so much for watching. I'll see you again next week.